For the members of the fourth estate who are joining us across the African continent, we will have a session where you get to interact with our speakers, and you can do that by posting your question on the Q&A chat box at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Also, just for the sense of time management, we do anticipate to have this session for about an hour. So I will, after my brief introductions, I will introduce the Group Chief Executive of Liquid Intelligent Technologies, Mr. Rick Radnick, to share his thoughts. After that, we'll get into a panel conversation for about 30 minutes, after which we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session. We would like to take in as many questions as possible. So if you could make your questions brief and be clear who specifically you'd want to address it, that would really help in getting this on the way. Okay, great. So let's get this show on the road. Why are we having this conversation today? Obviously, under the auspices of the Liquid Intelligent Technologies that are doing a lot of exciting things on the African continent. And just to sum up a lot of what we'll be discussing here today is that we're here to talk about connectivity, but connectivity not just for the sake. You will hear a lot from the great people at Liquid about the great strides they've made in connectivity. You'll hear about numbers like 100,000 miles. But why connectivity? We're not connecting for the sake of connecting. We're connecting because we believe of the impact this would have in business, in life, and social on the African continent. But more importantly, we are enabling a digital inclusion conversation around Africa, where we've seen a lot of solutions that have been crafted to try and move the continent forward. A lot of the solutions that are already being used, but we are saying that readiness to this starts with a stable and steady connectivity, but not just that, but with a back end that supports all the challenges that you might be facing as a business leader on the African continent. But before I talk too much, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Nick Radnick, who is a Group Chief Executive Officer at Liquid Intelligent Technologies, to just set the scene for us of exactly how we got where we are and what exciting things they're doing at Liquid. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. You know, it's a really exciting morning for us because it really is the culmination of more than 15 years of building out network across Africa, and it really is, you could say, the coming of age of Liquid Intelligent Technologies. It's Liquid at 100,000, not at 100,000 years, but at 100,000 kilometers. So this is a journey that really began almost 20 years ago when we started as a satellite company, and which has culminated today with the announcement that our network has now reached 100,000 kilometers. And if we look at the history of the company, which really began around 2000, but as a satellite company, but over time had evolved into the largest fiber network company across Africa, connecting South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and also into East Africa and West Africa. It really today is the culmination of a long journey and many steps along the way. As you can see, our network is now vast. It really extends to most of the African continent. And I often say to international investors that actually the fiber footprint is 3 times the land area of the United States. So in an international context and with an African context, this is indeed the largest independent Pan-African operator and fiber network connecting more countries across Africa than any other. Liquid at 100,000 kilometers. As I'd mentioned, we started out originally connecting South Africa to Zimbabwe, then connected South Africa through to Rwanda and Kenya and Zimbabwe, and ultimately added on Botswana, South Sudan, and now moved across through DRC into West Africa. And the effect of this network is not just to provide connectivity between Africa and to enable for the first time people to connect from east to west, coast to coast, something that was never possible before. It was almost like there were two Africas, one on the east coast, one on the west coast. We've now brought that together into one. But what it has also done is reduce latency. So the introduction of cloud services across Africa is now possible due to low latencies that can be achieved right around the continent, and even in countries which are landlocked, can now quite comfortably run some of the most advanced cloud and compute services. Some key facts that have been accomplished as we've built 100,000 kilometers. FTTX now passes 95,000 houses. We have over 1,000 points of presence across the African continent, over 250,000 enterprise and broadband customers, and we are the leading tier 1 transit provider in Africa. We have over 1 terabit of peering and content delivery network capacity, and we carry 76% of peering and CDN traffic within Africa. We're connected to over 520 gigabit of capacity in undersea cables, and almost 90% of that undersea capacity is used for our core network. So what does having a 100,000 kilometer fiber network mean? It means that we impact more than 100 million people. We're connecting more than 643 towns and cities, and every few weeks another town and city is connected. Just in the last week, we have connected in Bujima in the DRC, over 3 million people being connected to high-speed network for the first time. And as we build out across the DRC, the number of people who will for the first time receive super fast connectivity increases by the day. We've now developed 3 terrestrial corridors connecting East to West Africa. Again, the first one was the first to do it. We are now in the process of having 3. Over the years, we've had a number of historic achievements as we've built this fiber network. We were the first to put a fiber cable across the Limpopo River, connecting South Africa to Zimbabwe, the first to cross the Zambezi River to link Zimbabwe and Zambia, first to get to the border of Somalia some years ago, first terrestrial fiber link from Cape Town to Cairo, first cross-border link to Juba in South Sudan, the first to take Microsoft Azure Stack to Kenya and Tanzania, and now a number of other countries receiving Azure Stack from us. First to connect the Lobatse border in Gaborone in Botswana, and the first to connect Durban to Cape Town via the coastal route, which is National Long Distance 5 and 6. We've been making history over the last 20 years as we've built a 100,000 kilometer network, and we aim to continue to make history. Currently building a link to connect East Africa through to the DRC and through to the West. We are working on a low-cost Nigeria nationwide network. We have recently completed Lagos Metro Ring, and we are working on new undersea landing stations in a number of countries around the continent. And just in the past year, we have connected over 1,500 mobile network towers onto our network, enabling 4G and ready for 5G to commence in the continent. So, our partners have partnered with us over the years for all of these reasons. The size of our network offers better economies of scale, and it's a one network for many countries, providing low-cost connectivity and high-speed access to across the continent and to multiple cloud service providers, and also through to our data centers, which we will soon have in more than 10 countries. We are expanding our cloud ecosystem using a multi-cloud environment to provide cloud across our fiber network to customers and to wholesale partners. So, what this means in conclusion for our customers is that we have a network which is part of an ecosystem, including cloud and data centers, and also linking through to our newest division, which is cybersecurity, allowing people to work on the cloud and work in the new environment post the pandemic in a secure way. So it's an overall ecosystem only available from Liquid, and all based on the foundation of our 100,000 kilometer network, being network, cloud, data centers, and cybersecurity. And that really delivers Africa's digital future, where we say AI is not about artificial intelligence, it's about African intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. And I really like that last point. AI is not about artificial intelligence, it's about African intelligence. I'm going to tweet that and get lots of retweets. Thank you for setting the scene. And it's obviously been an incredible journey, which then segues us into the next few moments where we want to talk about connectivity on the continent. And we're talking about igniting Africa connectivity. With me to discuss this is as you've already heard from him, Nick Rudnick, the Group CEO of Liquid Intelligent Technologies. I'll also be joined by Abhinav Sinha, who's a Global Head TMT and Manufacturing at CDC Group PLC, as well as Same Shinoda, who is the CIO of the Africa Finance Corporation. Gentlemen, welcome. I'd like us to just pick off Abhinav from where Nick left, and he painted a very clear picture of all the effort that has gone into ensuring that connectivity actually happens and the impact thereof in the lives of people. From where you see it, if you could just paint to us a picture of the impact of a truly connected Africa for you, what would that look like?
Thanks. Let me start by saying that any core or any development is essentially built upon connectivity. So if you look at historical times, it's always been roads or shipping and so on. And in today's times, it's all about digital infrastructure and digital connectivity. And what happens with that is it's a massive force multiplier. So not only do you get the ability to speak to each other or access internet, you get far more than that. So you get the ability to do transactions online. You have financial inclusion. The people who use it build a certain credit history. They have a digital identity. And then there are all sorts of content that you can send on this digital infrastructure. So it could be around education. It could be around healthcare. So in general, it is a significant boost to any country, and you can see it in multiple different forms. And I think the one aspect which is now becoming clearer to all policymakers is that jobs, which is so essential for development, is also shifting online. So from simple jobs like the delivery and warehousing for e-commerce to much more complex jobs like if you're a shared mobility taxi driver, or if you run a small enterprise and you sell your goods online, and to much more complex jobs where you actually develop these apps and you sort of focus on cybersecurity and so on. So where we sit and see digital infrastructure is just a massive boost to a country. It's essential, and it's the way of the future.
Right. Let me bring in Sami into this conversation. From where you sit, Sami, as wearing the hat of an investor into the continent, when you picture connectivity, what comes to mind?
So I think it's a very valid question, and the fact that we are sitting here today, having a virtual meeting with people from all over the world is a very strong statement, post-COVID especially, about the importance of technology. If the connectivity was not there, we wouldn't have been able to have an event like today. The fact that 10% of increase in mobile internet penetration increases GDP in Africa per capita by about 2.5%, compared to 2% across the world, is a very strong statement. However, in my mind, there are a number of stars that need to be aligned. The economy, the internet economy, has to be thriving. There has to be private consumption. People are willing to consume and have access to technology. There has to be local talent to be able to develop the technology, the different, as Abhinav said, from very simple apps to very complicated cybersecurity type transactions. The human resource needs to be there, and the talent. There has to be both public and private investments from the government and from the private sector, whether all the way from VC to very large scale companies. And the infrastructure needs to be there, but backing all that, there has to be government policies and regulations that continue to support the growth of the sector.
Right. And Nick, just talking back about the impact, and you painted a very good picture when you talked about the Mbujimai people. And I know for your organization, it's not just merely about bottom line, it's also about the people. What are some of the indicators when you look back at some of this work that remind you that what you're doing is actually impactful?
Well, I think if you go back 20 years, mobile telephony was just beginning in the African continent. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget how far and how much things have changed just in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, most Africans had never made a phone call. Unbelievable now when you see many people having multiple devices. But still today, only 40% of the population of the continent have got access to a reasonable quality internet, which is still, below where I think where anyone would want to see it. You've got 40%, mainly in towns and cities, that have got access to the internet, but the majority of the continent does not have access to affordable, good quality internet. And some of the research has shown that if that penetration was increased from 40% to 75%, that alone would create more than almost 50 million new jobs across the continent. Just purely without any further development, just increasing the availability of pure connectivity. That's without looking at the impact of cloud and the impact of technology that will arrive with that connectivity. So, one can easily see, as I think both Abhinav and Sami have said, connectivity is probably one of the biggest accelerators for economic development. And I think when that connectivity is, as a multiplier, is multiplied again through cloud and the compute power of cloud and the kind of technologies and enrichment that cloud can bring to the way things are done into people's lives, the impact is probably greater than almost any other industry is able to achieve. And this really has been our ambition in building out this 100,000 kilometer network and continuing beyond that. but as I say, if you look that 20 years ago, most people hadn't made a phone call. Today, most Africans haven't, made use of cloud services. But in years to come, that will be as revolutionary as the arrival of the mobile phone has been on the continent.
Right. And I mean, let's talk a bit numbers now. And Same, your organization put out some very interesting data. I was looking at it. I mean, it said the internet economy has the potential to contribute $180 billion to the African economy, growing it to about 712 billion by 2050. And my question to you, Same, is, do you get a sense that African policymakers or even investors have fully understood the impact of the internet economy?
Thank you very much. Very, very good question. The short answer is it depends. Africa has 54 countries, so it depends on which country you actually look at. But generally, governments have understood the importance and the transition that the shift in the economy that technology can do. A lot of policymakers as well as private sector understand fintech, understands the solutions to support the economy that fintech can provide, the inclusion of people who never had a bank account, and as Nick said, never made a phone call, and now can operate, can run a small business using their mobile device and the infrastructure supporting it. E-commerce is another area where whether policymakers like it or not, they see it happen, and it's transformational. But there are some governments, such as the Tunisian governments and the Kenyan governments, for example, who have put in, for example, in Tunisia, there's a Startup Act. So they've put this in law. And this has helped a lot in terms of policy, in terms of establishing the legal framework. In Kenya, for example, there's also a similar structure where the government has set up the framework that helps these companies thrive. There are some countries that have taken this a step further, and there are e-governments, such as one of our investments, for example, is in Arise IIP in Gabon, where there's a single window administrative system, where over only a few years, the whole industrial zone has run seamlessly, and revenues have gone up to $1 billion because of that. In Kenya, as I said, there's a one-stop shop for all Kenyans to issue ID cards, social benefits, driver's license, and it's applied in other countries. So the important thing is that we're getting there on quite a few with quite a few countries. Policymakers understand that technology has to be affordable, has to be accessible, and with COVID, it has become an important tool for recovery as well. Thank you.
Right, and Same, you've mentioned something very important. Said technology or internet has to be affordable. So let's talk about the money for a moment, because as people like Nick are chasing for a universal, internet coverage for Africa, somebody has got to pay for it, and we can't rely on private entities to drive this. So maybe I'll stick with you, Same, for a moment before I go to the other guys. Give us a sense of the funding gaps you do see on the continent, the quest for offering affordable internet coverage for all.
Okay, so it's interesting. In 2018, the infrastructure funding gap was estimated at about $8 billion. It is estimated that by 2025, that funding gap will be $76 billion, and by 2040, it will be around $300 billion. Now, not a single type of institution will be able to fill that gap. If we have any chance for even part of that gap to be filled, everyone has to all the investment institutions have to work to bridge that gap. And there are different types of financial institutions that you could think of to play a role there. Some of them are private sector, some of them are public sector. And I try to think of them as, or categorize them in terms of their risk appetite. So there are a number of financial institutions that have a low risk appetite, and these include investment companies, commercial banks, VC funds, private equity funds, pension funds, where their willingness to invest is often complicated by concerns about competition, concerns about regulatory framework, concerns about startup risk, etc. So they're more of a sophisticated player. Once they understand the risk and they're willing to put money into investment, they do so, but the stage of going through the studying process and understanding the investment is quite thorough, and at that stage they try to manage as many risks as possible. And then on the medium risk appetite areas, the technology firms and the sovereign wealth funds have a bit of a higher risk appetite, where they are more of a long-term investor, they understand the sector well, and they are willing to take a bit more risks. The ones that take a bit more risk are the ones who are innovative, who are starting something new, or who are building the infrastructure. And the government usually fills a lot of that part of the risk curve, where they are the first people to build the infrastructure, the first people to, and they're usually motivated by national interest. So development banks, development funds, and actual governments, ministries, where they're motivated by national interest. There's no immediate return, there's no guaranteed return, and they take this high risk so that they can catalyze the transformation of the sector and attract private sector players to come in. But all these bits and pieces of the puzzle have to come together for that gap to be filled. Right. So there are different areas where different players come in, and there are different risk profiles that these players can play in as well.
Right. And I mean, you've talked about that cocktail of the different players. Let me bring in Abhinav into this. Abhinav, PPPs were perhaps in the past decade almost thought to be the silver bullet in solving all of the problems in the developing world. From what the premise that Sam has set, how, in your view, can some of these partnerships be structured to ensure that investments and efforts of people like Nick are complemented on the continent?
No, it's I think Samir raised a set of very interesting points, including the massive gap that we're talking about of funding and the need for cooperation. So everybody needs to step in and basically participate. Now, look, the nature of this digital infrastructure is similar to other infrastructure. You know, it's a public good, it's a long gestation period, it's high upfront costs. And therefore, you do need somebody to come in and take that initial higher risk approach, which is where governments step in and maybe DFIs step in. And, you know, I'll give you an example where the World Bank funded the network in DRC with the help of the utility, the SNEL network. And then companies like Liquid would go in, refurbish parts of it, add spurs, and essentially convert it into a commercially interesting opportunity. So those sorts of partnerships will be really, really important. But I think the way of the future is going to be slightly different. And, you know, I say that because digital infrastructure has a few things going for it, right? So first, the marginal cost of expanding capacity is very low. So this is not like adding another road. You know, you just need to add a bit more equipment and you can get a lot more capacity on the same pipe. Two, just for because we can monitor telecom calls and stuff, people have a higher tendency to pay for these, right? Unlike other utilities. And therefore, these two factors make it a bit more commercially attractive. And so you can involve a lot more of the commercial players. And if you look at the digital economy, it's dominated by, you know, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. And they stand to benefit almost disproportionately from increased connectivity. So the more connectivity there is, the more people will use, WhatsApps and YouTube and search and so on. So there is a very interesting partnership model here where local entrepreneurs and infrastructure companies such as Liquid work with the Googles and the Facebooks of the world in creating structures which where a lot of the risk is taken by these global giants or digital giants, and because they know that they'll get more benefit later. And I think we're seeing examples of it on the subsea side. We're seeing examples of it of specific connectivity in DRC, in Uganda, and I think that will be increasingly the way forward. And then look, there are specific models where you work with telcos and you say, we will create this infrastructure as long as you guarantee a certain level of offtake. And that's a more traditional one. That's where Orange and Vodacom's work with Liquid, for instance, and create a commercially attractive business. We're seeing that more and more on the data center side as well, where Microsoft is working with the likes of, again, Liquid and a few others to set up these data centers. So look, it will be about partnerships. The gap is so huge that we will need access to all sorts of funding. Government will continue to play a part. Multilaterals, DFIs will continue to play a part. But you will see big, support from the digital giants as well.
Right. And Nick, I mean, you will soon be or are already the largest independent fiber capacity provider. That title definitely comes with a lot of challenges, but just looking at it from the funding question, what sort of lessons have you learned, really trailblazing in this path that could be used to ensure that it's a lot easier than the journey you had?
Well, I think in terms of funding, what I hope that we've shown as an organization to, other enterprises across the continent is that funding is available. There is funding provided by, organizations, that, Sam and Abhinath represent. There is, we had issued a bond on the international markets, raised $850 million from the bond. We recently refinanced the bond, which a few months ago, with I think the lowest coupon rate that has been seen in an African, technology bond, or in fact, I think in virtually any bond issued out of Africa, the interest rate had come right down. And so, I think that the funding at this point is available for, good, viable enterprises and projects. And I hope that, we are setting an example for others to follow, not just in our industry, but elsewhere across Africa, to say that, it's not correct to say that there's no funding. There is funding. And, I think African enterprises need to understand that, there's funding locally, but there's also international funding for the right kind of enterprise, the right kind of projects. And, I don't think that there's a shortage of money. I think that, the opportunity is there for enterprises to take advantage of.
Right. Right. I'd like us to shift gears slightly away from the funding question and talk about another issue that is potentially a big player in this equation, whatever you're talking about connectivity on the African continent, the impact thereof. Let's talk about the young people. So Africa is a fairly young continent. Most of the African countries have majority of their constituents as young people who are predominantly the key drivers, early adopters, and basically driving the digital conversation. And my question to all of you gentlemen, perhaps I'll start with Nick, is how do we convert this whole demographic, question, the demographic divide, into a demographic dividend that we can reap in terms of Africa being a young continent and pushing a product that the biggest consumers are actually young people?
Well, I think there's three factors there. Number one is the cost of internet. We need to continue to bring that down. I mean, across Africa, the average cost of data amounts to almost 40% of the average monthly wage. So we need to bring that down so that young people can have access to fast internet, what I like to call the real internet. Because for me, the real internet is not a high-priced pay-as-you-use, mobile solution. The real internet, where people can be creative and create applications and uses, is a low fixed cost that allows people to have access to the fast internet. I think that's what young people need in order to immerse themselves in the technology. I think the second part of that is the networks itself, because we need to be able to deliver that last mile, and we can't just rely on the mobile networks to deliver the last mile of high-speed internet. Because of the technical nature of how mobile networks work, it is invariably a pay-as-you-use model. If you look at the more developed countries, there's virtually nowhere that has a pay-as-you-use model for home or business broadband. Yes, for a mobility solution, you have that, but people are not relying on mobile for their high capacity usage of the internet. When they're at home, it's a fixed monthly cost, and people consume as much as they wish. And it's that last mile that is still missing in many areas. We are trying to fill that gap with Wi-Fi and fiber to the home and various other technologies, so that we can bring a lower cost fast internet to businesses, to homes, to public areas where people can access it. But that is still a big gap in the African internet story. And thirdly, part of it is bringing internet to education centers. We have been working on a mapping solution which is open source, where we are mapping every single school across the African continent. We've already completed that in, I think, about 6 or 7 countries, and we're extending that everywhere, so we can identify every single school on the continent, which have been connected, which haven't, what the speeds are, with the objective of connecting every school. We've seen in Kenya that some of the largest users of cloud are the internet startups. So the internet startups using the hubs that there are in Kenya are some of the highest consumers of cloud in the country. And I think that is really setting the benchmark for others to follow, to say, can the connectivity be available, the internet be available, can the education be there, and can the tech hubs be there that enable young people to really start developing solutions for the African continent. So, that's where I believe we are the things that we're working on to bring the internet and to create opportunities for young people.
Right. Abhinav, you want to add anything to that?
Sure, Bonnie. So look, a couple of things. I would absolutely agree with Nick that a lot of emphasis has to be on education, because that's how you create enough capabilities to allow people to bridge that digital divide. And with the presence of this digital infrastructure, you can get access to the best education in the world. And of course, you need the ability to process that and so on. But I think as governments in general, we need to open our minds to this massive potential of around educating the younger people with what's available, with the best that's available. And so this initiative Nick talked about, I think, is fantastic, and we need to do a lot more of that. I think sort of less discussed part, but very, very important, is the availability of just the cloud infrastructure, because what it allows smaller enterprises to do, or for first-time entrepreneurs, is access things like payroll systems, customer relationship management systems at really, really low costs. So you don't need the big Oracle systems. You can just have something which is a lot cheaper. So helps first-time entrepreneurs and the youth to really engage with the digital economy. And Look, I think there is an element of role modeling and giving examples and mentoring that needs to be more actively sort of pursued in many of the countries, because uh, it's an interconnected system. It's all about ecosystems, and I think with companies like Liquid and many others, I think to get mentors there and to just enable the youth to see, look, what is possible would be a massive boost to the young.
Right. And I'm seeing already lots of questions that have come in, because I would like to allow as much opportunity to address most of the questions. So I'll ask gentlemen to just move to the next conversation that I'd like us to talk about, and then we can move into the question. And this is the conversation on regulation. Any market has its rules. The challenge here is that this market is fragmented with many, many different rules. Nick, you do operate in different jurisdictions, and we currently see different efforts to try and bring these markets together through the Continental Free Trade Area and other different regional blocks. But from where you see it, if you could just paint us a picture of what is your relationship with the regulator, be it as an enabler or as an impediment, and what do you see that relationship being? Then I would also like Sami to comment on that, and then we can jump into the question.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, we do see regulators as as enablers. They award us with licenses, they govern frequencies, and they are there to ensure that the market is operating as it should. So I think that is the role that they have to play. Is that, if you look at all the countries across Africa, is that a role that I think that is always paid perfectly? Perhaps not, but I think that on the whole, when I look at the regulators that we work with, there's certainly a strong intention and a strong desire to develop the African marketplace and to promote connectivity and to advance the economies of each individual countries. So I've never come across a regulator who doesn't have the intention to do that. And I think if you look at how the technology industry and the IT and tech industry has developed across Africa, they must be doing something right, because it has been advancing in leaps and bounds.
Right. Sami?
Thank you. I think Nick covered it well. It's in my view, the way I look at it is that there is a difference between intention and capacity. And while the intention is there for most or all African governments and policymakers, capacity and funding is another issue that in some cases the governments, large players like Liquid Telecom need to play a role to educate and support the policymakers and the governments to explain the importance of setting up the regulatory framework and of it being efficient. So in terms of intentions, they're there. In terms of implementation, in some countries, there are some work still to be done.
Right. Great. Gentlemen, I'd like us to segue now into the questions that we've received, quite a number, and thank you very much for everyone who's posted their question. We'll try to address as many as possible. I know there are people who've asked multiple questions, so what we'll do is that we'll take one question from each person, and if we do have time, we'll go back to your second and third question, if that's okay. My first question I'd like us to address comes from Samson Akintaro, who writes for the New Telegraph newspaper in Nigeria. Samson is talking about the Nigerian nationwide network and the Lagos Metro Ring projects, saying that these are classified as future projects. How soon are you delivering? So I guess that's a question to Nick. And how much are you investing in it?
Thank you. Yeah, so The Nigeria and the Lagos metro ring is almost ready for service. That will be ready for service in the coming weeks, and we'll have a formal launch in Lagos. And then we are working with international partners to put in the ring around the country. Our objective there is to reduce the cost of internet and IP transit on a wholesale basis inland, because what we see is that there's a big price differential between IP transit inland in Nigeria and what it is at the coast. So our aim is to try and shake up that disparity, and to make sure that we can bring affordable internet not only at the coast, but bring that inland, large quantities of fast internet for ISPs and others to make use of inland.
Right. All right, let's take the next question. Perhaps, Abhinav, if you could help us with this, because I'm seeing there's a lot of questions for Nick, so I want him to catch a breath at some point. The next question comes from Draku Franklin, who writes for the Daily Monitor in Uganda. And Franklin is asking and saying, one of the issues affecting access to internet is a high cost, particularly in Uganda. Government has continued to increase taxes on data. How do you navigate through this to make sure that more people still have access to internet services in Uganda? I think, Nick, there's no running away from this, but could they have Abhinav just some light on this?
Sure, Bonnie. I'm happy to help Nick out here. So, look, I mean, the cost of internet is a really it's a critical issue, and I think earlier Nick had mentioned this point as well, that worldwide, to drive and real innovation and real digital economy, you need to have, you can't have pay as you go sort of models. You need to have unlimited capacity for a price, and that's how you really enable innovation. Now, in Uganda, there are a couple of interesting experiments which are taking place. I know Facebook and others have been trying to set up infrastructure there, which could then help overall reduce the costs. And I think there is a whole aspect around access devices, whether it's handsets or on the tablets and computer side, which there are again discussions and manufacturing initiatives in Africa to say, can we drop the prices of that? On the data itself, I mean, this is the sort of tension that one goes through with the regulator, where they see it as public good and they need to monetize it, but equally, at some point, they need to also facilitate the increased usage of this. Look, I'll give you one data point which might be interesting for listeners. In India, maybe about a few years ago, Jio, which is Reliance owned, offered free internet for 6 months, and the data usage for each household was, which we think should be between 2 GB to 3 GB and so on, jumped to 20 GB. So if you allow people to use things for free, that is the sort of data that they can consume. And once this is known, people can price things very differently. So, instead of trying to optimize pricing at 1 GB or 2 GB, you can try and optimize at much larger numbers, which makes for good economics for both sides. So maybe that's an indicator for the regulators to think of and the participants to think of that.
Right.
Thanks, man.
All right, let me just bring in Sami to take this, then I'll have Nick address the other more specific question. Sami, talk to us a little bit about this question of cost and affordability across different African markets.
So, it depends, in my view, as to what is the cost of the usage of technology in the country, and what's the income of the individual. The trend we can see from different analyses in Africa is that most of the use is used by small businesses, financial inclusion. People have become mini multinationals, and small businesses have become mini multinationals where they can transfer money, they can buy products, they can move products. There's a lot of e-commerce there, so and a lot of mobility as well connected to that. So in our view, in my view, if a small business or an individual cannot operate using technology, then there's something wrong with the cost structure. Whether it is tariffs, whether it's pay as you go, as Nick and Abhinav said, as opposed to a flat fee, or taxes, something is wrong with the structure. It's extremely important to support smaller businesses, whether in agriculture, in healthcare, in commerce, etc. And if the small business or the individual cannot operate, then you need to tackle either tariff structure or the fee that they need to pay. Thank you.
Right. Our next question comes from David Whitehouse, who's a business and finance editor at the Africa Report. And he asked a very straightforward question. This is for you, Nick. What is the reason for the switch to liquid intelligent technologies as opposed to simply liquid telecommunications?
Well, it's a great question because it's not just a rebrand of the company, the same thing in a different package. It's a fundamental shift in the way that we do business. I mean, in the past, it has been about building infrastructure, about connecting people. What our business has transformed to is more of a fully fledged technology company, whereby we are utilizing the infrastructure that we've built, the 100,000 kilometer network, as the foundation of providing technology across our network for the use of our customers and end users. So that is especially, all the benefits of cloud. And I think the impact of cloud on the African continent is really at the beginning of being understood in terms of its compute power, the amount of technology that is now available at people's fingertips, and often available for free or available on a pay-as-you-use basis. So if you want access to big technologies, and as Abhinav was saying, CRMs and accounting systems, and that is all now available, no capital cost. You don't need servers, you don't need license fees, which could have been enormously expensive. It's now pay as you use for access to some of the most advanced technologies in the world, including artificial intelligence, all of these really powerful back-end systems, plus components and technologies that allow people to develop applications that have specific utility in Africa. So we see people buying from us in the future, not connectivity, but buying the technology and capability to do and have a variety of tools to do things that enable them to expand their businesses and improve their lives. So people won't come and say, what we want is connectivity. They will be coming to buy, specific applications and to utilize specific capabilities and technologies. And, that goes beyond the cloud. It also goes into things like cybersecurity, where we've seen, particularly through the pandemic, just an explosion of cybersecurity threats against businesses and individuals. Keeping safe online is going to be one of the big challenges for everybody who utilizes the internet going forward. I mean, just as during the lockdown, people went online, likewise, criminals moved online. And that again will be a big focus. So combined with our data centers, which is about saying to international cloud providers, you can't sit in Europe anymore, or in the US or elsewhere. You now need to host in Africa. You need to have low latency. You need to make your services available at high speed in Africa. And, that is an overall ecosystem that we will deliver. So, I'm not sure that we ever really fitted into the mold of being a telco. I think we were always more tech than telco, but, going forward, people will take the infrastructure for granted. What they'll be coming for is, the new digital services that, are going to, transform their businesses.
Right. Great. And we're going to take a few more questions. There's a question from Quentin Velue. I hope I pronounced your name right. And the question is, what is the most difficult step in the installation of fiber in a country like DRC? Is it negotiating with the regulator, bureaucracy, topography? What is it?
Well, no, I wouldn't actually say it's the regulator. I think that, there's a lot of support there for what we've been doing throughout government. I think probably the most difficult things is the scale of the country. I mean, the DRC is one country, but it's the size of Western Europe. So massive scale. And I think secondly, just the lack of existing infrastructure on the ground. We are building fiber. Normally you would build it next to the road. So, you would use the road to access and bring in your plant and bring in people to build a network. I mean, where we are building in DRC, in many cases, we are building the road as we go in order to put the fiber in, as opposed to using the road to put the fiber in. We're now, using the fiber to put the road in. So, there are places that have, are almost impenetrable. We've had places where just to do the site survey has been almost impossible to access, never mind actually doing the build. There are massive rivers throughout the DRC. I mean, it's not just the Congo River, but, we've got other rivers that we encounter en route that can be more than 1 kilometer wide. So some massive geographical hurdles to overcome, vastness of the country, and a lack of supporting infrastructure to make the build easier. We're not able to rely on other infrastructure to build what we're doing. So, those are the challenges. And, what is the latest challenge we've got there is a volcano. We've been building in Goma. We've got warehouses and things and people in Goma, which we've had to, move to safer locations. So yeah, never a dull day.
I don't envy your job, Nick, at this point. Let's hear from Samuel Ouma from Pan-African Visions in Nairobi, who says, accessing internet in Kenya, in particularly in rural areas, are marred by a myriad of challenges, especially unstable network. What are you doing to solve this challenge?
Well, in Kenya, we've been building out the network for a number of years now. I think we were the first fiber network to connect every county in Kenya. So, every county has now got fiber connectivity from Liquid. I know I was there myself when we put fiber into Siaya. Enormous amount of excitement to see the fiber arriving. And, it really brought home that you can go into quite remote areas and people completely understand what the arrival of fast internet is going to do to their lives and what it's going to do to their children's lives in terms of advancing education and so on. I mean, I was, just amazed at the number of people and the amount of excitement that came to see kind of the first meter being dug of putting in, the ducting and the fiber. So, we are continuing to roll out in the counties, particularly the remote counties, and to improve reliability and to improve access and cost of access. We put in free Wi-Fi on quite a large scale in places like Eldoret and other towns in Kenya. And, we've got quite a large expansion plan lined up to bring in Wi-Fi into some remote areas, because we think that's the lowest cost access point is to use Wi-Fi, and to start bringing that in and enabling, low cost, high speed internet. So I think the answer to that question is watch that space, because it's something that we're actively working on.
Right. There is a question from Deborah Matavu, writing to us from Zimbabwe. She is a journalist with the Sunday Mail in Zimbabwe. And she asks, Nick, you mentioned you're doing something about mapping, some mapping on the schools in Africa. And she's trying to find out, do you have the data on the number of schools that have internet on the continent versus those that do not have, and how much is being invested in this program?
Yeah, I mean, we have got every, for instance, in Zimbabwe, every single school is mapped on this open source system, and I can give you the link, which maybe somebody will put up in the chat as well.
Sure.
But it's basically https://schools.liquid.tech, and you can go on there and see all in Zimbabwe we've mapped all the schools. It's one of the countries we complete on. It shows you which schools are connected. It shows you the speed of the connection in those schools, and the schools that aren't connected gives you the exact coordinates of the schools. It's all open source, so we make it available to anyone. The objective is to get all the schools connected. It doesn't have to be on our network. I mean, if there are other networks locally more suited, that's fine with us. We just want to see every school connected. So you can go on there. You'll see there's a number of countries where we have already mapped all the schools, and we are now moving on to map all the remaining countries in Africa. But well, as I say, we'll drop that into the chat. You can go and have a look at it, completely open source. We've been working with actually UNICEF to give them that information, because they're also want to see schools connected. And yeah, it's a big project for us. I mean, we don't make any money out of that. It's really just saying, how can we advance the continent by getting every school connected.
Right. And that's a fantastic data set to look out for. I'll be also keen on that. So Deborah, look out for that link on the chat box, and for that information. Let's go to Nigeria now, where Emma Okonji, writing to us from Lagos, is asking, the question is, how will the entrance of liquid into Africa help increase broadband access and reduce costs?
Well, I think if you look at the cost of internet on the coast of Africa, where the sea cables come in, and you look at the cost inland is about 5 times what it is on the coast. So by building our infrastructure, by increasing capacities going inland, by making greater scale of use. And the statistics that Abhinav gave was incredibly interesting about what had happened with Jio in India, because I think that as we can bring in more economies of scale and have higher usage of capacity inland, we can get those prices down, because we shouldn't be seeing prices inland 5 times what they are at the coast. So our infrastructure is designed to achieve that. And I think, particularly what we're doing in Nigeria is designed to achieve that. But to say, can we put in very large pipes that bring in huge amounts of capacity that, see a significant reduction in cost, particularly inland? And then it's the last mile, because the last mile is also something in Africa that pushes the price up quite exponentially.
Right. As we receive a few more questions, I'd like to just pose a question to all my panelists. And I mean, Nick, you've talked about the impact of the pandemic, and I've seen several questions coming on. Are there rebates? How do we ensure that people are still connected in the wake of this pandemic? Let me start with Abhinav. Let's talk about, how do you imagine a world post-pandemic? What are some of the calibrations that need to be made by organizations like yourselves, investors, or even private players like Nick, in the wake of the past 2 years that have been catastrophic for this world?
I think, Bonnie, look, this has been a black swan event. I mean, something none of us ever imagined. And what it's done is it's really catalyzed the first sort of usage of connectivity for every part of our lives. So whether it's education, whether it's accessing healthcare, whether it's doing our full work, we were forced to use this where it was available. And then over time, what we found was that the systems were actually quite resilient. So you can do your transactions, you can do these meetings, for instance, right? And so, so it will change the way we will live going forward, the way we'll access education, healthcare, and our work. And I think this will stay. I mean, this is a big line in the sand. It's going to change going forward. Now, there are a few structural challenges, and we as CDC need to think about it as well. We've always thought of connectivity as, look, let's first get mobile connectivity in. But now broadband, and especially broadband to home, is almost as essential. And one needs to keep that in mind as one thinks of developmental impact. Because once you've got used to this, it's quite essential. We've seen, there was a study in South Africa of the difference in sort of the student scores between students who had access to internet at home versus those who didn't, and the difference is so stark that it's not. We'll create another digital divide if we don't focus on proper broadband connectivity to home going forward. And look, I mean, there are so many things. I think Nick alluded to some challenges as well, because in the hurry to use connectivity, we don't have the safeguards that usually we would have if we had developed slowly. And so it also leads to cyber crimes and, therefore lack of trust. So there are many things which still have to work out, but it's allowed usage, it's allowed trust and confidence for first-time users, and it's forced us to rethink on priorities, that we just don't need mobile connectivity, we need broader internet and at home.
Right. And Sami, how do you imagine a post-pandemic world for investors like yourselves, or indeed the people playing on the ground?
Thank you. It's interesting. I joined AFC in January, and we had at the time a sector, a team that was overseeing telecoms. And by telecoms, we were looking at mobile telephony providers, towers, etc. And since I joined, I've been working with the team to expand, because of COVID and because of the trends we're seeing, to expand that sector into telecoms, into technology. So we're now looking at projects in broadband, data centers, e-logistics, e-customs, and e-governments. We have a few very interesting projects, for example, with governments where we provide an e-solution for customs, where instead of for a product to move into the country while it's still on the ship, instead of collecting 12 different signatures, it just is done and processed on the ship before it arrives to the port. So these are areas that we feel that there is a role for us to play. It wasn't the case last year and the years before, but with the change of the pandemic and how we see the trends going, AFC is playing now, starting 2021, a very aggressive role to lead and to support companies like Liquid and others to grow in these different areas.
Right. And Nick, Abhinav talked about some challenges that do arise in a post-pandemic world, some like insecurity. And I'd like to tie that to a question asked by David Whitehouse from the Africa Report. And he is asking, where do you see the greatest demand for new cybersecurity business?
Well, I think that we're seeing it everywhere. There has just been an explosion of cybercrime, of phishing attacks, over the last month. I mean, it's just last months. it's been extraordinary and alarming all at the same time. And it's why we are rapidly ramping up our cybersecurity solutions to protect our customers. But one of the things that has become very apparent is that one of the most likely ways of a cyber breach occurs through human error and through phishing attacks or people giving away their passwords, those kinds of things. That accounts for the vast majority, well in excess of 90% of cyber breaches. And this is and what that means is it's not about someone sitting in Russia or somebody trying to hack into a network somewhere. That is the minority of cyber attacks. The majority is through phishing attacks and through other means. So we're putting a lot of emphasis in developing training programs, both for our own staff, but also for our customers, to make sure that they are, less vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. It's people imagine cybersecurity that it's very high tech. It's a lot of software and artificial intelligence and trying to counter penetration of the network through malicious hacking. And yes, that is a part of it, but a bigger part of it is just making people very aware of the kind of threats and risks and how these are being perpetrated in order to prevent cyber breaches taking place. And then secondly, enabling organizations to know what to do once those cyber breaches have occurred and how to detect them. I mean, some of the research that we've done shows that on average, it is taking more than 8 months for an organization to even realize that their systems have been breached. So from the day they breach to that being detected, is on average 8 months. So, that is something that needs to come, way down in terms of detection. And then there needs to be, incident response plans, well established in advance on how to deal with a breach once it has been detected.
Right. And for the interest of time, gentlemen, I'd like just to take one last question. And this one comes from Adeyemi Adepetum who writes for The Guardian in Nigeria. And he's asking, for the Nigerian market, what strategy are you going to deploy for market penetration because of the tough competition that already exists there?
Well, I think for Nigeria is very simple, is that we are bringing in large capacities, bringing in big pipes, and reducing the wholesale cost of bandwidth inland. So, for us, it's not so much retail. I mean, we will service some of our customers on a retail basis, but on the whole, the objective there is to provide large capacity on a wholesale basis at very low cost. And we believe that that will then filter down, because I think you're right in saying it's highly competitive, and it is highly competitive. But again, as you go inland, you're seeing prices higher than what they should be. So we want to be an enabler to facilitate those already in the market, but allow them to provide lower pricing. Right,
gentlemen, I'd like to bring this to a landing now, and. In a sense of your closing remarks, let me start with Abhinav. What do you see as the low-hanging fruits for a truly connected Africa?
Okay, I think setting the the digital infrastructure backbone, so essentially just having fiber there, is probably the single largest low-hanging fruit. I think what Liquid is doing is incredible with this 100,000 sort of terrestrial miles of fiber. I think you're seeing massive developments from Google and so on with their subsea cables. So big pipes are coming onto the continent. I think just driving this fiber as much as possible is really going to then change the dynamics on pricing I think with digital infrastructure, everybody understands, from consumers to regulators, that it's important. It can change the way things are done. So enabling that is the key, and that's the low-hanging fruit. And therefore, companies like Liquid are doing the right thing there.
Right. Some question. What do you see as the low-hanging fruit from where you see it as an investor?
So I'd like to build on what Abhinav said, and say that the priority is to combine the opportunity with the funding. And as Nick said, that the funding is there, but there are pockets of funding that are important to tap into. So it's how to fund the low-hanging fruits as well is quite an important one. And players like AFC, like CDC, and like many others have an opportunity to support the liquids of this world, let's say, to grow the business and to develop more bandwidth and more accessibility at an affordable price to everyone.
Right. And final question, Nick, as you take us home, where do we go next for Liquid Intelligent Technologies?
Well, it's further, we've just had this transformation in terms of the positioning of the company, the kind of products and services that we're going to have out there, the switch to technology. We want to get technology into the people's hands across Africa so they can start to make use of it. As economies start to pick up again post-pandemic, we think there will be different economies. There will be more scope for digital services. People will have realized the utilization of it. And, we want to be the facilitator and the driver, for the expansions of, the new economy.
Fantastic. That's a good place to leave it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sparing your time to talk on this very important conversation. We've been spent the last couple of moments just trying to wrap our minds around the question of connectivity with lots of insights from you all. I'd like to thank Abhinav Sinha, Global Head of TMT and Manufacturing at CDC Group PLC. I'd like to thank Same Shinoda, who is a CIO at the Africa Finance Corporation, as well as our host for today, Nick Radnix, the Group CEO for Liquid Intelligent Technologies, as well as everyone else who tuned in this call. Remember, if we didn't get a chance to get to your questions, they will still be responded and inboxed back to you, so look out for that, as well as a recording of this conversation and a press release from the Liquid team. For myself, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.